Patreon's really big if you're building an engaged audience and you can give them the opportunity to help you. You're not begging, you're not pushing, but you're giving them that path.
That was Jonathan Oakes, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. And my goal is simply to uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. And this episode is with Jonathan Oakes, who is the host of Trivial Warfare. Now, if you want to build a super engaging community that will support your hard work on platforms like Patreon, you're going to love this episode. And we're going to also talk about some marketing strategies. Plus, Jonathan's going to reveal some of his long-term revenue strategies as well. And definitely listen to the very, very end if you want to learn how to find some pub quiz trivia games in your local area. Let's get into the show. Right, you're on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Florida, okay. I was like I'm like, did he ever mention it on the show? I can't remember, but maybe you have, but I just didn't pick it up.
In 130-something episodes, I've definitely mentioned it once or twice.
You did? Okay, so, I mean, I've only listened to, like, maybe 5.
Well, that's a lot if you're listening to newer ones. That's quite a lot of hours.
So, yeah, like, even last night, I listened to, I think it was your most recent one. Mm-hmm. It's weird because since I started listening to the Joe Rogan podcast like a couple months ago, I feel like an hour and a half is like nothing now. It's like so weird, right?
That's funny.
And you started with what'd you start with, like 30-minute episodes?
Yes.
And then now you're like, you cracked 2 hours like a couple weeks ago, right?
I've cracked 2 hours a couple of times. When we started, it was just me and Chris, and as a result, it was a different game and didn't have as much interplay between the people playing. But as we changed the game around a little bit and as we added more people to it, it definitely expanded it. So the longer ones are a function of both the way the game is played and how many people are on them. More people equals longer shows.
Longer shows. And I'm assuming like there's more. Is there more like banter, I guess? Now?
Absolutely. Well, yeah. I don't know if there's more banter. There might be more banter strictly because there's more people to come up with a funny thing to say.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
When it was Chris and I, we had plenty of banter, but if neither of us thought of something, then we just moved on. But if you have 5 people playing in a game, somebody's going to think of something.
That's true. Because I know like the questions are provided by listeners, or like do you write the show or write the format or not really?
In the old days, it was Chris and I would write questions for each other. But in the early days, like episode 8 or 9, we brought in a local host for the first time, and he brought in questions that were used around town. And slowly but surely, as we've added hosts, those hosts have become responsible for creating and bringing their own questions. And the listeners have the chance to send in questions to different mailboxes depending on which host they favor. And so if the host needs any help with questions, they have a ready supply of them from listeners.
Yeah, and that's cool, man. Now you have like people that could jump on the show that listen. That's got to be the coolest thing, you know, especially like I heard, I can't remember which episode it was, but they love the show, but they're not good at trivia. And I just felt like that's me. Like I feel so, I love your show. It's fun, but I feel so dumb. Like I'm like, dude, I don't know any of these, but it's entertaining as hell. You know what I mean? Like it's so weird. I mean, I don't know if you get that often, but I think it's so cool with the whole hosting, and that's to get on the show is is that through Patreon?
It is a Patreon reward, and you know what you just described. That's actually one of my goals. The goal is if the show is doing well, if it's a good episode, then a person who doesn't know anything about trivia should still be entertained. If a person who's not a trivia person is entertained, then we've accomplished our goal.
That's true. Well, the warm up is usually like I could guess. Like, I still don't know, but I'm like, I can kind of guess. And then it might get a little hard. Some of them I'm like, dude, how do you even... It's difficult. But I guess if you compare to... Like, do you ever listen to other, like, trivia similar shows? Maybe just for your own, like, competition gauge?
Yeah,
like, and listen to their difficulty, or...
Funny that you ask. Before, when we started the show, there were no head-to-head competition games out there to listen to. That was actually one of the reasons that I started the show, was because I wanted a show that was something that was a competition, because that's what I like. And now there's a lot of them out there. And to be honest, from what a lot of them are our listeners who have kind of branched off and wanted to try their own hand at it. And we love that. So, I mean, there's some great shows out there like Beat My Guest and Triviality and Stuff I Never Knew. There's just different stuff that has... The hosts are doing a great job, and they're going through the growing process. They're learning a lot of the same things that I had to learn. And so it's really fun to be in the space now with so many people doing it.
Yeah, but, you know, you make it sound so easy. I don't know. Have you practiced this? Like, practice sounds like a dumb word, but, like, you know, this is obviously your hobby, right? It was like, because when I think of trivia, man, the only time I even did this at all, I'm going to share like a little piece of my history, is like my family got together one time and played this Disney DVD game thing, trivia. You ever hear this?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
It's corny, right? Like, this is like 10 years ago. Or not 10 years, maybe like 7 or 6.
Was it called Seen It?
Seen It. Okay, yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Is that like, that's super lame maybe, but I'm like I like Disney, right? I grew up as a kid, VHS tapes and stuff, but that I still would miss like the dumbest things, you know, like, and I don't know, man. Like, did you practice before? Like, were you like a Jeopardy buff or something? You know, how'd you get so good at trivia? Because I think you're pretty damn good.
I appreciate that. I thought I was pretty damn good until I started doing the show. and now the sample of people I compare myself to is significantly greater. And I in terms of trivia players, I am average to pretty good. So that gives you an idea of when I'm comparing myself to people. There are people who are just at a different level. But so I started liking trivia when I was young. I was a kid who wasn't very athletic and didn't have. My hobbies always tended to be towards things that I felt that made me feel smarter, right? And so remembering things is something that I was always good at. My mother tells me a story. She says, "Jonathan, we knew there was something pretty strong about you when you were 3 years old, and we would play the game called Concentration, which is basically the matching tiles game, where you flip over a tile and try and find the match." Apparently, when I was 3, I was playing against my parents, and they couldn't beat me. That's according to my mother. So I had a knack for memory at a young age. And then you kind of grow into it. You find that answering questions makes you feel good about yourself. And so you try and learn more so that when things come up, you know the answers to them. And eventually, you start watching Jeopardy and you go, a lot of what I get comes from bar trivia. And that's where that was the inspiration for the format of the show. It's straight out of bars all across America, where you have teams. They're getting questions, or writing down their answers, or turning them in. And my friend Chris and we would play once a week or so, and it's essentially a free meal every week if you're able to be in first or second place. And so that's what we would do. Wow.
Simple, man. So, all right. So then you were playing the games, and then you were just like, let's just make this a podcast. Like, where'd that trigger?
So there's a show out there called Good Job Brain. And Good Job Brain is a really good show, and it's a trivia show, but it's not trivia questions as often as ours is. It has once a month they do an all question bonanza or an all quiz bonanza show, and that's more questions. But other than that, they typically find interesting topics and talk about them and research them. And I liked just the quiz part more than the other parts, right? And I'm like, gosh, if they would just stick to this and be a little more competitive, it'd be right down my alley. And so I started looking. I was like, well, maybe there's another show out there. And so I looked. I searched trivia, and I searched pub quiz podcast, and I found a few, but they didn't float my boat. They weren't what I was looking for. And I realized, these guys over at Good Job Brain, they're normal people. They're not super special. No offense to them. They're great, but they're normal people. And if they can do it, well, why can't I? If Chris will do this, Chris, I keep mentioning him. He's my best friend, and we've played trivia together for years. If Chris will do this with me, why don't we just record ourselves doing it and see what happens? And we started like that because there was nobody in the space doing the game that I wanted to do. And it's all grown out of that.
Yeah, it's crazy because, before I set this interview, I started doing research also. I'm like, what other shows are out there? I'm curious, like, if he looks at competition, and, Good Job Brain came up for sure. And it's cool that you kind of found like a different angle at it, because I think your approach is like, I don't want to say like they're not authentic, but it's more of like an obtainable, casual conversation. Like you're hanging out with your buddies, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what your show stands out differently from the two I just mentioned, and I'm sure other shows, which is why I could even, because I'm not a comedy buff, and it's not intimidating, you know what I mean? And I think that's, again, to what we talked about earlier, is that's your aim, I assume. Like you deliberately kind of did that, or I'm assuming maybe that's just all you guys' personality, because even when you have guests on, they kind of fit they fit the group right, you know what I mean?
That's a really interesting observation. Almost all of the guests that come on have spent time in our Facebook group, which I started after about 8 months or so. And so a lot of times, even when I've never talked to the person face to face before, I still have a sense of who they are. And so that's really good to help kind of foster a good quality relationship when it comes to recording the show. But I would also, I honestly think that trivia in general attracts a certain kind of person. It's, we're a little bit nerdier than your average people, and a lot of us have gone through similar experiences of being the person who likes this kind of stuff, and some of us have been picked on for it, and so there's more of a bond when you find other people that are in your tribe. When you find somebody else who's doing the thing that you like and you feel like you're the only person around who likes that thing, then there's something of a bond there that's created. And so it's pretty easy for our listeners to make friends with each other, frankly. And I love seeing friendships spring up because a lot of us just have a lot of similar traits.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I'm sure now, like you said, you have your Facebook community, man. I joined recently. Obviously, you cracked over 1,000 people, and it's not like you just have 1,000 just to have 1,000. There's like people constantly posting. Like I can't even keep track of how many people post in one day, and like different feeds come up, and I'm like, dude, I don't know. It's highly engaging, man, which is super impressive. Everyone's trying to stump people with these questions. That's got to be something that's really cool, to have a community that is part of the podcast group, that everyone's like so close like that, constantly helping each other and tips and tricks, right? Like that's the coolest thing. It's
become on the side, the show is the show. It's becoming more and more of its own thing, which, I mean, it's an engagement opportunity for us with the listeners, which is how it started. I can tell you this, when it started, after about 6 months, as cool as it is now, it was really great even early on, because you developed your relationships when it was smaller more tightly. And a lot of people who are still there, still going strong now, are people who have been there now for 1.5 years or 2 years. Well, 1.5 years. And that's like the tight core of your audience, because they've been with you now for this long and they've been interacting with you every day. So I've developed really good friendships with people who were just listeners to start out with, right? And so that forms I don't know how to say it, but it forms a part of the group that doesn't go away. And so when people join, there's a strong culture that's developed. And some people kind of float on the edges, and they'll contribute every once in a while, and that's awesome. I tell anybody who joins, engage the way that you want to engage. I'm not here to tell you how to do this. You do it in whatever way makes you happiest. And so some people float on the edges. Some people like asking questions. Some people love answering questions. And some of my favorites are the ones who find ways to just generate fun stuff. Like there's a post right now. I'm sure it goes from message board to message board, but it's tell where you're from using only one GIF. And so there's like 100 and some odd responses of people with just a GIF that represent where they're from. And that's not a trivia question, right? But it's fun, and it gets people to kind of relate to each other and know a little bit more about each other. So that part of the show, having that group, has been really powerful, and it's very important in terms of the growth of relationships in the audience, which then is very important when it comes back to how people view what the show is doing for them. So when you mentioned earlier Patreon, you mentioned coming on the show as a reward. I can promise you that for the people who are on Patreon and determining how much to contribute, they take into account the relationships that they've developed as a result of the show. We get credit for all of that when people are trying to figure out if they want to support us or not.
Mm. Yeah, I want to talk about Patreon, but I want to quickly jump back into the Facebook group too, because I think there are going to be people listening that are like, okay, I want to create my Facebook group, or when I did, it was a ghost town. Maybe now, do you feel like it kind of runs itself a little bit, as opposed to, like, you didn't have the Facebook group when you launched the whole show, right? You've been up since like 2015. And you said, talk about like the beginning stages of like nobody being in there, maybe to like 6 people to now you have 1,000, that difference.
Absolutely. We started the show. The first episode was February 2015. I didn't start the Facebook group until December of 2015.
Okay.
And I can remember I was at New Media Expo 2015, which was like, I think maybe April or May. And some of the advice, I was totally new to podcasting, and some of the advice that I heard was, in fact, I remember a session from Jay Soderberg at Blog Talk Radio, and he was telling people you need to develop a badass clubhouse. That was his term for it. And it was on a panel, and they were saying, look, once you establish this and once you've grown it and nurtured it, it's going to do its own thing. Your listeners are going to do it for you. You're going to have more than you ever dreamed of. You just have to create it and establish it in a way that is good for them. And so I knew at that point early on, okay, I need to be doing a Facebook group. But the truth of the matter is I was scared. I didn't want to start the Facebook group because I was afraid of throwing a party that nobody attends. I don't know if you've ever thrown a party. I've thrown a couple, yes, and it's a nightmare. The 15 minutes before it starts, or even the 10 to 15 minutes after it starts. And, people like to show up late for that kind of stuff, where you're sitting there at the time the party is supposed to start and there's nobody there. And you're like, oh my God, I'm such a loser. What am I doing? Why have I done this to myself? That's the way starting a Facebook group feels, because you're afraid nobody's going to want to do it. And you have revealed to yourself just how bad of a loser you are. That's how it felt. And so for me, what I did, it took me, like I said, I knew in April I needed to do it. It took me to December to get the courage up to do it.
Oh my God.
Now I'll say this though. The first true engagement that I started having with listeners was about 5 months in. I think I got my first email 4 or 5 months in, and that was 1 email. And the next month I got another email. That was 2. About 8 months in, I had 5 or 6 emails. So to be fair to anybody who's starting a group after starting a podcast, if I had started the group in April, it would not have taken off the way that it did when I did start it. The audience had developed and coalesced a little bit into, it wasn't going strong by the end of December, but there were definitely more people who had started listening and were relating to the show at that point than there were if I had started it in the summertime. And so when I started it, what I did, I seeded it a little bit. I identified people in my own friend group who I thought would enjoy it. And even if it was just going to be us, that's what I told myself. Even if it's just me, and I invited, I think, 20 people, I only picked people that I knew enjoyed trivia. Even if it's just me and 5 of these people who I know like trivia, if we have a good time, then this is okay. And that's how I kind of got past the hurdle of being afraid. And I committed early on to having a question of the day and having at least one set of questions like on the weekend. And then anything else I wanted to do, I would try and get people to engage. And it was slow at first. Absolutely, it was slow at first. But the cool thing is that folks who eventually became super fans joined pretty early. You know, you announce it on the show and you put links to it on the Facebook page, which is different than the group. So you promote it as much as you can early on, and the ones who really like what you're doing will join within the first 3 months or so. And that group, some of those people are leaders in the community today, and it's fantastic that they've become such a key cornerstone of the show. But that took time to develop. But if I hadn't started it, if I hadn't gotten over my fear, and if I hadn't gone through the early days where I was putting in much more effort into trying to make sure there was something to talk about, then we would have never gotten to the point where it started doing stuff on its own without me forcing the issue.
Okay, so I think that's pretty cool, man. Like, just you basically cold messaged people and said, "Hey, join my group." I'm curious, and I like that's kind of what you did. Like, some people are like, well, I don't want to reach out, because some people I think are afraid to kind of promote their podcast, right? Like, they're like, do I tell my mom? Do I just tell my friend? Do I message these random people in these random podcast groups? Is that the way to do it? And I mean, the cool thing is you've noticed at least from like month 1 or start to like 5 months in, I'm assuming you noticed slowly a download growth. I assume, right? You at least had that reference of, okay, some people are listening, I'm getting, a few more downloads. Was there any marketing or advertising, or like, had you all right, so you posted your first episode, then what? Did you just stare at the downloads all day, or did you send it to someone else, or what was that first step of like, dude, I want to start telling someone about this show?
So I'm a stat guy. In my day job, I'm an IT guy, and before that, I was an analyst, so I did a lot with numbers and analysis. And so I absolutely was one of those people who checked my stats every day for a long, long time. That doesn't help them grow, though. Like right now, looking at your stats is one of the least effective ways to grow them. Let me try and think back to what I did back then. It was a different time. It was much, much different than it is now. I can tell you that I definitely shared it on my page, and I absolutely tagged people in my own life that I thought would be interested in it, right? And I had the benefit of having a co-host, Chris, and Chris was doing the same thing. And so we told our friends at work, and we told our friends that doing other stuff. I said we were playing in bars at the time. So we told our favorite hosts, and a couple like Mark, who was in a lot of the early shows, used to give us shout outs at his local game. So that kind of thing helped. I remember at one stage I had purchased 500 business cards from Vistaprint, and I started making it a habit to leave a business card with every tip I left at a restaurant.
Dude, Vistaprint business cards. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's old school, man.
So, there was a lot of ground level stuff. I'm trying to think early on, the things that were most effective for me after the first few months, honestly, were mostly about working the kinks out of the show. So while there was the ground level promotion that you do to tell people it's out there, it wasn't so much of a case where I was getting it in front of enough people to to really worry about it too much, right? We could change things and it wasn't going to throw anything off. We had gotten, early on, we had some good feedback from people who tried it. We had one friend I remember who said, I tried to listen to it when I was going to sleep, and you guys kept making me laugh, and so I couldn't go to sleep, and so I had to turn it off. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great sign. Because if you were trying to zone out and you couldn't, we're doing something. We've got your attention. Mm-hmm. So that was great feedback. Like early on, first 5 episodes, somebody said that. But I had the blessing to go pretty early on, like episode 12 or so is when I was at New Media Expo and started meeting other podcasters. And that was a huge blessing for me. And it was also a huge difference maker for me, because by meeting other podcasters and starting to get engaged with the podcasting community, the podcaster communities out there, building those relationships allowed for cross-promotion. And so there were, in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s of those episodes, the 6-month mark of the show, right? We were starting to bring on guests, and we were starting to cross-promote. And that kind of stuff was invaluable. And I'll tell you a couple of things, or at least one thing about cross-promoting that was so big for us is that we'd bring on, one of our listeners, I don't know how he became a listener, actually. He might have gotten it through the podcasting side. Nick Suberling, who does Cincinnati Soccer Talk now, became a really big fan of the show. And so when we brought him on, he absolutely started recommending it to anybody he knew, right? So it wasn't just having somebody on the show. It was having somebody on the show who really liked what we were doing and who was proud to tell people that he was on the show. Ramona Rice was another early guest in the early 20s, and she does the Spapreneur podcast right now. She used to be Sports Gal Pal, and she would tell everybody about it. And so those small things that slowly started to add up, anytime, literally at that point in the game, anytime I could get one person who didn't know about the show to hear about it, no matter what method was used to get it, I would take the time to try and make that happen. And I came to believe later that you never know which one listener is the one that's going to open gateways for you, right? Because you never know which listener is the one. But we've had listeners that introduced us to trivia communities that we didn't know about. We've had listeners who are big local hosts who have shared us with their game audiences. We've had literally 50 to 100 to 200 listeners who have ties into the community where our audience lives that became fans and started recruiting fans and listeners for us. And any one of those that we didn't get, any one of those that we hadn't taken the time to try and sow the seeds that would reach them, would have been a big loss for us. And so I definitely learned to value the relationships with every listener, because you never know which listener is going to be the one that helps you kind of tip the scales. Yeah,
I love that, the whole ones and twosy thing, which is like people don't want to put that hustle in, or they don't think it's massively important to get someone that's super niche and interested, the ones and twos, And I'm sure, like you told everyone at your job, you said, right, or your coworkers and stuff. What did they think about the show?
Yeah, that's just Jonathan doing his thing.
Really? Okay, so they expected it, kind of.
Well, they didn't expect me to start a business venture, but more of a doing the trivia thing. I still have family who, even now, 130 episodes in, 2 years plus, almost 3 years into this, who are just now becoming aware of me doing this podcast thing, even though I've been doing it for 3 years, right? So it doesn't matter necessarily how many times, and every week, if they see my Facebook page, they see a new episode, they see me talking about it. But you never know what any of the people that you're close to are going to think or going to do. But honestly, most of the time, they're not going to pay attention. And at my office and my work environment, I don't recall getting any early listeners, except for I was less successful than Chris though. So Chris, out of the two of us, Chris is the friendly one. Chris is the one that everybody loves. And so when Chris told people at work, hey, we're doing this thing, you should totally check it out, more people responded to him than did to me. I'm 100% sure.
Wow. That's funny. And yeah, because I remember I started, a YouTube channel way back, right? Like, I don't do it anymore, but, when I was sharing it at work, and, most people actually didn't watch it. Like, I don't know why. They're just like, no, we know you. We'll just talk to you if we have a question or something. Like, it was just like the weirdest thing. So it was like pulling teeth. And I remember even to get my family to recognize, I had to like specifically ask them to watch it, or, hey, have you checked this? So it was like awkward. And then once they all started like listening and watching, then it was even more awkward. It was like, oh, you listened to that? I didn't know you guys actually listen. Like, it's like that weird, you're not supposed to listen, but you're supposed to listen feeling. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Just getting your own mother to do it is the hardest thing. My mother wants to listen. I've played shows for her when we drove together somewhere, and she's like, oh, this is really fun. I like this. And then I show her how to do it. Nope, never happens. So now, like we had a big moment earlier this month. We won a podcast award. My mother's like, I'm so proud. What does that mean? And it's like it's funny how that goes.
Some people don't even, like some of my family doesn't even know what a podcast is, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
Just like a whole nother. It's crazy. So I say radio show, but it's funny. We were making like light of it or like making a joke, but the truth is, you kind of you've been like really taking a more serious spin to it, right? I saw that you put on your Patreon that you updated to, like a business venture, right? You converted to an LLC. That's crazy. That's a big move, man.
Yeah, thank you. I did do that specifically because I'm not a financial guy in terms of taxes. Taxes scare me. Audits scare me. And so last year I had enough income and outflow come in to where I knew it was getting to the point where it was going to be too big to say it's just a hobby. And then you're claiming business expenses, and there's a lot of gray areas when you're doing your taxes yourself and you don't have an attorney or a accountant doing it for you. And so doing the LLC was primarily because with the money that's coming in now, it felt like the responsible thing to do to make sure I could separate these things. And so you get a business credit card where you do all your expenses on that, and you do separate accounts so that you can keep everything as clean as possible to prevent future problems. That was the primary reason for that.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Like, I don't know. He's like, everything's a business expense. Everything's a right.
No, well, that's actually the opposite. If I can help it, I don't say it's a business expense. Like just the other when I was at Podcast Movement in LA, I guess it was last month. The flight and the hotel and that kind of stuff, those are business expenses. But food is weird on business trips. It's a 50-50 kind of thing. And so I eventually just started using my own card for that and not the business card, because I didn't want to deal with any kind of risk of, okay, is it a business expense if my meal is too nice? What if I take somebody out? And it's like, oh God, I don't know if I can count it or not. And so I avoid if I can. Like
$8, like anything more than like $10. If it's more than a Chipotle burrito, you're like, that's not fair,
Exactly. It's like, yeah, I could have. I don't know if this counts or not, so I don't want to risk it. Those things aren't going to be bad anyway.
Yeah, that's true. But you also have the LLC is set up for it's in Florida, right? Obviously, so you get no income tax or something.
We have no personal state income tax. I will definitely get taxed for the show, but the show wouldn't be a personal income tax. It would definitely be a business tax. Okay.
That's pretty, and I think it's pretty cool. When I was, I always say like, oh, I was looking up this. Like, I feel like a creep sometimes. Like, oh, I saw this on Patreon and stuff. And, because you're pretty, I like how transparent you are. And, you do like the Patreon updates. I think I keep referring to Patreon because I think you're most authentic about the business and maybe downloads or dollars that your income earning. And I think that's really cool that because some people are really, maybe you won't feel like this as time grows, but like they're not embarrassed. like, you don't want to come off like, hey, we have 10,000 downloads. Like, I'm so, like, I don't know. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because you're pretty transparent with talking about your updates and stuff like that.
So specifically, what's the direct question on this one?
Oh yeah, I don't know, man.
Do you want me to just talk about?
Maybe that was more of a compliment, I guess. I think that was more of a compliment, because so yeah, no, that was literally, wow, yeah, that was literally just a compliment. I just appreciate your transparency. I think that's pretty cool.
I appreciate that.
Let's talk about some ways you get paid, right? Like, because the reality behind it is people want to turn their hobby from, like, from a hobby into a passion, to a business. Like, you did the ultimate, like, American podcast dream, So talk about, like, how do you earn money on this show? Do people know, like, your income sources, income streams?
So I don't make a big deal about them. Let's use September as an example, and then I'll tell you a little story about the danger of podcast income. So we've been building up on Patreon since March, I think, of 2016. We were over a year old, and I remember being really excited about the first month. We had like 13 people and $90 after 1 month, and it was like, that is amazing, and I was so proud of that. And I have an MBA. I'm a successful business person in my day job, and so one of the things that I realized as I was doing the podcast is that the stuff I learned doing the Master of Business Administration, was really a lot of stuff that's useful for starting your own business. It's about running your own show more than it is about being good at whatever job you're doing. And so I found that a lot of things that I had learned over the course of my education were becoming useful to me with the show in ways that they were never useful to me at work. And so as money started coming in, as people started donating, I started coming up with strategies on, okay, well, what can I do to increase this? What are the ways that I can grow? But at the same time, I was really awkward about it, frankly. It was really hard to ask for money up front. I'm not a salesperson, never have been, never will be. And over time, because of the amount of work that I've put in at this point, and trust me, I put in a good 20 plus hours a week every week on top of my 50-hour a week job.
Wow.
And so I've lost that sensitivity at this point towards asking for money. I have a strategy on how I do it because it's easiest for me and makes me feel comfortable. But at this point, I really do believe I've earned people's support. And so I'm much less shy about giving people the chance to support us. And so my strategy is simply letting people know, hey, there is a way. If you love the show, if you think we've earned it, then you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TWA, and you can figure out what the right levels are for you once you get there. But I know that I've put in the work that's worth supporting at this point, and so it's better now than it was back then. But back then, it was still, I wanted to make sure that people knew they could listen and not feel guilty. So if they weren't donating, I didn't want them to stop listening because they weren't paying for it. So I made it a point to tell them, look, the only people who should give us money are people that feel like we've earned it and they want to support us. But if you haven't heard enough yet, or you're just kind of lukewarm, or you're enjoying it, but it's not worth money to you, then don't do it. There's no pressure at all. I don't want your money if you don't think that we deserve it. And I've maintained that now since the beginning, and it's still true. So my fans, the people who give us money on Patreon, are the people who really want to, So yeah. Even when somebody brings it up on the message board, other people will chime in and they'll say, you should absolutely donate money. It's totally worth it. And those are people who haven't come on the show yet. They haven't had their turn yet. So Patreon's really big if you're building an engaged audience and you can give them the opportunity to help you. You're not begging. You're not pushing, but you're giving them that path. And so that was a great one for us. We've done T-shirts, and I found that T-shirts for me, at the first time I did them, I tried to make money off of them, and then I realized they're a promotional item. I want people to wear the t-shirts. I want as many people as possible to wear a Trivial Warfare t-shirt, because that's people that are going to be out and about revealing the brand to people. And so from then on out, after realizing that, I stopped trying to make money off of them, and I put them at literally zero profit to get as many sold as I can. So that's something that I learned. Anything that's promotional, I don't try and make a profit off of. The other primary source for income, it was advertising. And I say was, I used to be with Blog Talk Radio, and they have a dynamic insertion of advertising. And so with Blog Talk, you will have advertisers like Burger King and Progressive and Geico, etc., all the big names, but they're not paying big rates for those spots. So you don't get a lot of money for running those ads on the show, but you create the understanding in your audience that there will be ads, and there's actually some importance to that if you're going to run ads. And as the audience grew, it actually became pretty sizable. I mean, there was when I left Blog Talk, I was getting to the point where I was making a consistent $100 a month on those advertisings at the low rates. But I also started working with Jessica Kupferman with JK Media, and so I was paying her to help find ads. And when I moved to Libsyn, I engaged Libsyn's advertising and said, hey, if you want to put spots with us, absolutely, we're open to it. And so I opened up as many channels as I could. In fact, even after leaving Blog Talk, because I had been successfully advertising for them, we arranged it to where I could keep doing that. They could keep placing spots for me if they had them. And so all of that started coming to a head. And so in August was a pretty good month. I actually made more than less than $1,000, but a few $100s. And that was great. And then September, we had a lot of opportunities come at once. And for the first time, we were running 2 ads on the show on the same episode. And I booked about $1,600 worth of ads in September. And I was like, wow. You grow the Patreon, and then the ads start coming in, and you start to see a future where, God, just maybe we could get to a point after a number of years where this could be self-sustaining and truly be a business where I could leave my other job for. And you start dreaming that, right? Mm-hmm. And then the stat snafu hit with Libsyn on September 18th. My stats had been dropping significantly over the course of the month of August. At their peak, we were averaging 25,000 downloads per show and had episodes as high as 35 plus. And that was great. The advertisers that's why we were getting attention from advertisers later in the year this year. Then the numbers started dropping, and it was really nerve-wracking because here we are in August. I'm finally getting multiple ads, and we're not hitting the numbers we've always hit. What the heck's happening? Then we get the notice on September 18th that Libsyn has done some adjustments to their stats to be more accurate, and the people who are hardest hits are the ones with longer shows with larger file sizes. Mm-hmm. And we lost 70% of our audience overnight. So the real numbers show us right now, if I don't have multiple months of data yet, but it looks like we don't have an average of 25,000 downloads per show. We have more like an average of 6,000 downloads per show. That is still a lot of people, and that hasn't changed our donations at all, but it's effectively going to eliminate all of that advertising. So what was going to look like maybe $1,000 a month income stream has become what looks like it's going to be a $0 a month income stream, just out of the blue, just like that. So that's a heck of a thing to experience in recent times here.
Yeah, that's tough, man. I mean, in the beginning of the story, you're sharing all these victories. I'm like, oh my gosh, and then now you kind of got a little like sad towards the end. I mean, it still puts you in like that. What, like 15% of podcasters in the world, right? That get those sort of numbers. And I don't know, have you thought any, okay, so I guess, cause you have, the advertisers, like I heard, Oh, maybe that was last month, but I heard the Mac Weldon underwear. When did you I heard that ad. When was that? Was that last month?
That was a couple of episodes back. So that might have been the end of September, maybe the beginning of October. No, that was both in September.
Okay.
Yeah, those were part of the September run. Those were supplied by Libsyn. That's who had that was our first one with Libsyn. We had finally cracked through the ceiling there.
Well, if it means anything, I thought the ad was great because it was just like super casual. You guys were just like chilling, hanging out, like just talking about underwear. I just thought that was so cool. I just want to make that a point before I get to the next thing. That's the only reason why I thought that was cool. It wasn't like it wasn't really cheesy or corny or fake or staged. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Honestly, I thought those ads were hilarious.
They were, and then at the end,
I remember recording them.
I was gonna
say again
at the very, very end. Then you like add a little bit about. I can't remember. It was just some. You get like a little silly with it. Continuation of the ad, but it's like just being silly.
Oh, you're talking about the Bombfell one.
Maybe is it like at the end of the show you add a little.
Yes, we do outtakes at the end of the show.
Okay,
we have one outtake per episode, and so when we advertise for Bombfell, one of our co-hosts who actually hosts games is Ben, and Ben was the person who got to try on some Bombfell stuff. And he had just been watching a video about the Unabomber, and he goes outside and has a box at his front door from Bombfell. He's like, I did not take that inside my house for a few hours.
Oh, man.
That was awesome.
That's good, though. So with all this, with all the ups and downs and stats and stuff, I'm sure you kind of rethought, have you rethought your long-term revenue strategy? I'm sure you're thinking outside the box a little bit, or maybe you could talk a little bit about some ideas that you're thinking about, or what's your long-term plan?
Truthfully, I'm literally working on it. I'm literally thinking about where we go from here. I don't have strong answers, frankly. I can tell you that I know this. When I talked at Podcast Move and I talked about Patreon and engagement and building your donations and how to do that, and I quoted stats in that talk from my own experience, and I was pointing out that if you have more than 0.7%, not 7%, 0.7%, if you have more than that who are donating to your show, you're head and shoulders above most people who are using Patreon. And so looking back on it after this stat adjustment, looking at my engagement numbers, holy crap, we have 2.4% of our audience who's donating. Whoa.
Yeah.
That's huge. We have, when I look at our engagement in the Facebook group now, 1,000 plus people, 1,160 something I think right now, and I'll tell you now, I look at the engagement stats on that Facebook group, we have 900 plus people who have engaged in the last 30 days. So it's not dead people, or
it's crazy.
That's the wrong way to say it. It's not dead accounts. It's not fluff. It's real engagement. So to see that, to realize that 15% of my audience is highly engaged and 2% of my audience is donating, it makes me feel I didn't feel bad about it before. I just thought that was reality. But looking at it now, that's really encouraging to know that our impact on our audience is that strong, and our relationship with our audience is that good. So I take solace in that. But in terms of growing revenue streams for the future, we're going to continue doing Patreon, and I believe that's going to continue to grow. I did recently introduce exclusive bonuses. The thing that drives people when they choose a layer, when they choose a reward tier on Patreon for us, is that at the $10 tier, that's what gets you on the show, or at least gets you the chance to come on the show. And with trivia, we're a game show. People want to play our game. That's a huge advantage over a lot of other different types of shows, right? That's built in. And so when I started getting those emails and started getting those in the reviews and in the Facebook group, the thing that most people wanted to know was how could they get on the game. And you'll notice around episode 63, 64, that's when we started having more and more guests. And now we have guests every week because I have to, in order to meet my statements of what I was going to reward these people with. And so there's There was a gap, though. We had lots of people at $10 and $15 and $25 for the different stuff there, but there was very few for $5. And I got a piece of feedback from somebody who said, well, I couldn't really afford $10 a month. I didn't really want to do that. And I didn't see any point in doing the 5 or the 3 or the 1. And that hit me. It's like, wow, there's no point. I need to put a point out there for people who don't want to pay that much. And so I've started committing to at least one exclusive bonus for people who are officers or above in the Trivial Warfare Army, which is the $5 level or above. Lieutenant is the $5 level. And so they are now starting to get monthly bonuses through Patreon. In fact, I was right before we jumped on together, I just finished recording one that I'm going to use in November. It was an awesome show too. It's totally, the cool thing about it is it's not just a bonus of the normal show. I've reached out to our audience and said, look, create new games. Come up with new styles of trivia, the things that you wish we would try but we've never tried. If you have some creativity, put something together. You'll be the host. I'll produce it. I'll help you. We'll get it together. I'll help you have players. I'll find the people to play for you, but you can be the star of that show. And so not only is it an exclusive bonus to help drive people to donate if they wouldn't have donated before to the $5 level, but it's another engagement tool with the existing audience. They're getting a level of engagement, getting to be the star of a show. And that's meaningful in a new way. And so that's the kind of stuff on Patreon that I really explore doing to help drive more growth there. Another one, goals, the usage of goals and figuring out ways to use your goals that don't, it's not a goal for you, right? It's a goal for them. What do they get when you hit those goals, and trying to figure out ways to make that more meaningful for them. Those are I honestly believe now that our numbers are down the way they are, the advertising isn't going to be our key. So if I want to continue to grow, I need to double down on what I'm delivering for the audience so that they feel it's worth it to continue to donate.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I mean, people are like clearly donating because you're giving them so much value, right? I mean, you're offering a free podcast and it offers that much value for them to say, you know what, hey, I feel this is a good way to support you, to give back to you. And that's got to be pretty fulfilling. And I think, or actually, have you thought about like not physical product, but I don't know, it sparked an idea because I saw you had like a free guide on, I don't know if that's just like for email collection or like some sort of build your trivia skill up or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So what is, gotta talk about that, because I'm not, like, what is it?
That was, and it's still out there. People, it's funny, I actually get like maybe, I get at least one a day of a new person who's downloaded it. It was to create an email list. Okay. Back in 2 years ago, I was hearing advice again and again and again. The same way that I was hearing do a group, I was hearing you should have an email list, you should have an email list, et cetera, et cetera. And so I figured, okay, well, here's my hook. This is something that I think has some value. All I'm asking for is an email. Let's do this. And so I put it together, and it has been successful in collecting plenty of emails, but frankly, I've never used them ever.
Oh, so you don't email out your show when you launch an
I don't
episode?
email my no, I never do.
So just the group.
I use the group. I use Facebook. Wow. Facebook is my primary engagement. I use Twitter. What I believe I've found is that I think email lists are much more important for business-focused shows, for marketing shows, for shows where there's a product, anything that's supporting a product or a sales opportunity. That's where the list is important. If you're doing a hobby show, that email isn't the way that people are going to find your show. Email isn't the thing, at least in my experience. That's not the thing that's going to hook people in. They're going to hook in based on engagement. They're going to hook in based on what they hear about it, word of mouth, what they see in communities that are related to your topic. But if they're anything like most people, emails are just going to end up in a spam filter.
Yeah, I mean, well, the reason why I brought that up, I was thinking, like, all right, you have a free guide, but, you offer value to, like, if someone listens to your show, like, dude, I want to be like him. I want to step up my game. That's why I was like, oh, I wonder if you've ever thought of, like, offering, like, a legit manual or, I don't know, some sort of, like, live, because you see a picture, there's, like, some sort of class maybe, or maybe it's just a picture of random people, but I was like, oh, maybe he did, like, a pub group or a live event or something. That'd be so cool.
You're pretty insightful. I've experimented with both, actually.
Okay.
I've tried a couple of local events, and they were okay, but nothing special. I thought about writing more guides and charging for them, but frankly, the time commitment to do it never got off the ground with me doing it. And then I tried to, sometimes I can leverage my audience to do things. And so I said, hey guys, here's the idea. You guys have all this knowledge. You're better than I am at a lot of this stuff. Why don't you guys write the guides? I edit them, produce them, publish them, whatever. We split it. We split any revenue and do it that way. The only crux of the matter is I'm not going to babysit this. So if you want to do this, then we'll set up a process, but you guys have to be fully engaged in generating this in order for us to work on it. And after 2 months of it, me not babysitting it to just counting on people to do what they say they're going to do, that doesn't work. If you're not highly invested in it, then it's not going to happen. And so the work necessary to do the guides falls through. Most of what you've probably seen in pictures, though, I make it a point whenever I travel, and for my day job, I travel more than I used to. I make it a point to tell people, hey, I'm going to be here in this town on this night, and I'm planning on going out to play a pub quiz game, so I'd love for you guys to join me if you're in town. And so far, everywhere I've gone in the last 2 years, I've gotten to meet listeners, and those are awesome experiences. Earlier this year, I did an Ohio trip where I was going to be in Columbus for a couple of days. I was going to be in Toledo for a day, and I was going to be in one more place. I can't remember where. And so I said, I'm going to be in this place on this day, this place on this day, and this place on this day. And so I played 3 games in 4 days and had a total of maybe 15 people come out for the 3. No, that's not true. There was 7 at one. There was 4 at one. Yeah, it was 16 or 17 people over 3 different games. And so they were intimate, You really get to play, and we're playing a game, so it's not awkward at all. We're all getting there. We get to meet each other, but we also get to play a pub quiz game, and they get to play with me on a team, which is really cool for them. And that's not a cocky thing to say. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but that's something that they really like the thought of doing. And so those experiences are really fantastic. Anytime that I get to go out there and meet people who have been listening and talking to us that live long ways away, I do it every time I can.
I guess because the only difference is that's a little more of like a physical, like you kind of have to like be there and engage, and it takes more time to prep and plan, right? I'm assuming. So I guess on the other side, like the more because we're in like the digital world, right? You have like the Patreon, like the more passive side. Like I'm such a creep, man. I'm like, I just do research. That's all I do. That's all I do, man, to get these questions. But man, I saw you post on Facebook about some sort of like pub trivia list or some sort of database thing or something like that. Like a whole I don't know if I'm even supposed to share this though, but I mean, I figured if you put it out on Facebook. Because you're like, dude, stop sharing all these like little tips, like you're giving away too. But you know what I'm talking about, right? Like the
I know exactly what this is. Brand new. This is it doesn't even have a name yet.
Dude, that's a huge idea. So can you talk about that or no? Yeah,
I can talk about it. So what I've come up with, an idea, and you're right. This I don't even think about it as a multiple revenue stream yet, but it is a potential revenue stream. When I travel, I want to easily see what games are going to be in the area that I'm going to. And what I've learned is that there is no place to find that. Every company has its own website. Some of them don't even have a website. Every restaurant advertises their games differently. If you say, I want to find a game in this space, it's almost impossible to figure out what all is available. And on top of that, you have no idea if the game that you're looking at is still active, or if the host is any good, or if the restaurant's any good. And so it's a crapshoot if you're not from the area, right? Or even if you're from the area. And so I realized this is a gap, and I am uniquely situated with contacts throughout the trivia community all across the U.S. now, and in lots of places in Europe, where I should be able to take advantage of my position to help pull something like this together. And so I'm looking at creating a Yelp-like directory for trivia games, where the first key is to identify all of these games and get them listed on a website. The second key is trying to work with the companies who put on these games to help keep them updated. I think at first that's going to be hard. I expect to have to outlay money to get people to work for me, at least with the biggest companies, to keep track of their drops and ads when it comes to shows. And I'll probably have to pay to help collect all of the information. And so I want to get those published so that there's something out there at least where you could go out there and say, hey, I'm going to be in this area. What's out here? And you could sort it by day and by type of game, etc., what company, etc. On top of that, I want to make it a review site so that when you find that game, you can see how it's rated, how the host is rated, how the food's rated, what type of game it is. Is it hard? Is it easy? Do people go, etc.? And so that piece of it is where I really feel like I have an advantage, in that if I can get it set up technically to operate, then I'm literally just going to ask our listeners and say, guys, go out there and represent the shows that you've been to. Go out there and do reviews. Even if you just throw star ratings on them and don't say much, let's start building up a real database of this information so that when we're all going different places, we'll have that resource. And so it's a combination of, this is a resource for my audience that I know is valuable because I would need the resource. But if it's done right, if it's successful in terms of engagement, then it also becomes a revenue opportunity. Because if I'm a company like Geeks Who Drink, which is one of the biggest pub quiz companies over in the western side of the U.S., when they do their big Geek Bowl coming up in March of next year, if they know traffic is going to this site, then they would want to advertise on that site. Or in the Yelp model, you have featured ads or featured locations, that kind of stuff. And so we could work with those companies. We could work with potentially restaurants, wherever, to establish income streams from that website if I can do it successfully. And so that's something that I'm just starting on. I see the technology. I see what I think I'm going to do with it. And I've actually been working really hard this week to edit all of my shows in advance so that I can use this weekend to try and at least stand up a template, a minimum. Let's not get technical, but I just want to get a minimum viable product together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if I can accomplish that this weekend, then I can start working with people on the data. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, man. It's funny because the only reason why I have the thought behind that is because my wife worked for a company called coworker.com, which is basically, and like for a lot of people that work online and travel, these places are able for them just to search, I'm in, New York City, or I'm in Thailand. You search, okay, what's nearby? Okay, this is a nice spot. There's ratings, the reviews. And, she was there from when she doesn't work for them anymore, but we used to like travel to certain places and visit places and email people and go to, like, it's like, oh my God. But the cool thing is, I'm trying to give you some positive feedback, is like your community and the people that love the show, and man, it's like, it's your passion. So I think it's gonna be a lot easier to be, quote unquote, the TripAdvisor of pub trivia. I'm not trying to like bucket you in that type of title, but I think that's really cool, man, is all I'm trying to say. And I think that'd be huge. That'd be really such a valuable resource for so many people. And even I would do something like that, if it was like an easier way for me to kind of jump into a game or something like that, or watch a game, or just have a little more insight on something like that, that's easier without web searching, right? Because if you search for something, like it's difficult to even search for good trivia shows sometimes. You're like, oh my gosh, this is like too much. You just want that whole one.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah. So that's pretty cool,
The
man.
key is bringing them all together in one place.
That's huge.
That does not exist today. And so if we accomplish just that, that's a win.
Yeah, that's huge, man. Well, because that gives you you have the traffic. So I mean, have you ever thought about doing? You don't do live shows, right? Not live or like a live video.
You know, I've thought about it a number of times. We've had plenty of requests for it, but I honestly don't think it will work. And the reason for that is that the show is more highly edited than anybody realizes. We don't have time limits on thinking about the answers to questions. Nobody is smart enough to answer the difficulty of the questions we deal with consistently with good speed, you know? And honestly, if you try and force speed, which you would have to for a live event, then you lose a lot of the energy of the thinking it out and the part of the game where you're trying to figure something out, and then either you go the wrong direction or you go the right direction, and people are kind of hanging on whether or not you're going to get it. That's a part of the game. That's a part of the show. And you would lose that in a live show because it would have to be built for speed, and that would be a different game.
Yeah, that's true. That's a super good point, and also you have more guests now, so it sounds smooth and pretty and good when it comes out on the podcast, but I'm sure there's so much more editing, there's cutting, people talking over each other, I'm sure, especially when you had the, I can't remember if it was called like the drunk episode, but the drinking.
Oh my God.
It gets wild,
yes.
Man.
That was hilarious. And yes, that was so edited. Like, it had to be. Even in a general episode, it's funny, something that happens after people get their chance to come on. It's not unusual for them to increase their donation because they realize for the first time just how much work must go into producing the show after they know what they recorded, and then they hear it once it's produced, once it's released, they hear what it comes out as, and they realize, oh my gosh, I know what we just went through, and it's nothing like what the end product is. And so it's actually not uncommon at all for people to go from $5 to $10 or $10 to $15 a month after being on the show because of that.
So it's crazy because I think that's why, to try to wrap up the show because we're kind of creeping over here, but you make the process kind of look easy, but like, could you I don't know, man, like, is there a time where you're just like, F this? You know what I mean? Like, I know it's your hobby, I know you love it, but there's got to be that moment where you're like, dude, this is so much, I'm dead, like it's 4 a.m. or this is no good. Have you ever had that moment?
No.
Not really. That's the grind. That's the
answer. Something that I learned a while back is that this like hits every trigger for me of the things that I enjoy. I enjoy accomplishing things. I enjoy creating. I enjoy feedback. When people like what I'm doing, man, there are some people in the world who don't need anybody to appreciate them, and they can still be successful. That's not me. If I was working this hard and nobody was appreciating it, then I wouldn't do it. I couldn't do it. But it's at different layers. Now I put in a lot more work than I did once upon a time. So the feedback is commiserate. But the engagement that we get with the audience and developing friendships and seeing other people become friends with other people, like one of the favorite things for me is when I see people that I know had no idea who each other were become friends, and then on my Facebook feed I'll see them liking each other's stuff. That's such one of my favorite feelings in the world, because I realize that doing the show, doing the work that I'm doing, is bringing people together in a real community. And so when I get tired, I get tired. Absolutely. I think to myself, man, I haven't really taken a break all week. I've worked every night. There's those moments, but it's never not worth it. We're getting recognized. We have people telling us how much they love what we're doing all the time. People are talking with their money. We're getting a higher level of support than almost anybody I know. It's a smaller audience. I mean, we're not making enough money to do it as a full-time thing, but for the audience we have, it's great. And all of those feelings, they push me forward in a way that you can't imagine. And so I think sometimes what's going to happen when it ends. And I don't know when it will end. Because I rely now on other hosts to write questions and to bring their own stuff, and we have so many guests, I imagine it could keep going in perpetuity, but at some point, will I get tired of it? I don't know. At some point, will it become not worth it? I'll tell you one thing, when you have your stats drop on you like that, you start to question, you say, okay, well, what am I getting out of it? What's the value for me? Am I less happy? And as far as I can tell, it's going to keep making me happy, and I'm going to keep doing it. And those are things that keep me from ever having a moment where I think it's not worth it, because it's totally worth it.
That's cool. I love it, man. That's good. That's a great way to wrap up, man. It's so personal, so authentic, and I'm glad you're fulfilled, man. I think a lot of people should, do more things that they love and enjoy, and that way, when things get rough, it seems to be, or the trend that I see, it seems to be easier to get through those terrible moments, right?
Absolutely.
If people are listening, they want to check out the show, trivialwarfare.com, or is there any other place that people should go?
Trivialwarfare.com. You could find us on YouTube. If you search Trivial Warfare, we're in all the podcast apps. Truthfully, if you search trivia on iTunes, you should find us there too. We should be easy to find if you know what to say.
Thank you for listening to the 13th episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out Jonathan's podcast, if you want to join the Trivial Warfare Army on Facebook, or you want to search for a pub quiz trivia game in your local area, go ahead and go to podcastninja.net/13. I'll talk to you soon.
Podcast Ninja.